What's up, YouTube? Today I'm going to be talking about in my opinion, what I think is like the best areas to be in when shit hits the fan. So first, when choosing where you want to be when it goes down, there's a few things you need to take into account. So you want to think about human factors, which is like your population. Do you have family and friends in the area? How familiar are you with this area? So those things are all going to have a part to play. And then also you want to consider environmental factors like the weather, the geography. Is it rugged terrain or is it going to be more flat? Plants and animals and water. So all those are going to come into account. So one thing I was thinking about when making this video, I'm a history ed major, so I read lots of history books, and one big trend in history is you tend to see the more rugged places tend to be areas where there's a lot more freedom and liberty and that sort of thing, and the lowlands or the more flat places tend to be where you have empires that dominate the population and that sort of thing. And a lot that plays into that has to do with like mountains are harder to access. It's hard to march an army up into a mountain. It's a lot easier to march an army across the plains. Not that it never happens, but as a trend in history, that's just how it goes. And even today, it's still a fact. Like, for instance, Afghanistan is a really rugged country. And, the Soviets tried to take it and couldn't hold on to it. The U.S. has tried to take it and couldn't hold on to it. Well, they're still trying, I guess, but, you can't really subdue the mountainous places. And that's just one instance, but it happens just wherever there are mountains, usually. Another thing about the mountains is, in the plains, you could be on the plains and you can see someone 2 miles away, and they can see you as well. In the mountains, or even just the hills, any kind of like rugged terrain, especially with forests and stuff, you can be just on the other side of the hill from someone, a quarter of a mile away or less. There can be even a big group of people, and you might not know that the other's on the other side of the hill. So, that's a big thing too, because having a high population in a mountainous area still tends to feel more remote than having even a mid-sized population in a lowland area. And the last thing I'll say about that, I lived when I was a kid in a small town in West Virginia, and it was like more like a village than a town. There was a Walmart in the next town, and it was 10 miles, in a straight line as the crow flies to this town with the Walmart. But the way the roads went, it took an hour to get there. So that just goes to show, like, mountains are hard to access. And it's a really big thing that comes into account whenever you're looking at where you want to be when it goes down. So I looked at a couple of different regions of the United States, not all of them, and just kind of did an assessment of, the pros and cons of each one. So first I did the Midwest, and as I'm saying these like regions, I kind of mean like in general, not like every part of the Midwest. I live in the Midwest, but my area of the Midwest isn't even really like this, so just as a general rule, I'm talking about how the Midwest generally is. So in the Midwest, you have a pretty low population, and it's pretty spread out. You do have some decent-sized cities in the Midwest. There's Chicago, of course, but as a general rule, the population tends to be spread out, not really closely clustered. And you have lots of big game, especially in the western Midwest. And, like, I've drove out to Montana a few years ago and drove through South Dakota and Iowa and all those places. And, you can look out and you can see for miles, and you could just see, in several instances, you could see herds of pronghorn, and you could see like deer, or there's times we saw elk, but you could sometimes see hundreds of animals just from where you were, because it's so flat, you can just see for so far. So, having a good high-powered rifle with a decent scope, that's seems to me like it'd just be a limitless supply of food, which is good. It's a big plus. It's also pretty decent for growing crops. I mean, that's sort of the breadbasket of the U.S. But up in the northern Midwest, you have a pretty short growing season, and of course really harsh winters, so you're going to need to come up with a way to be able to store all that food. But yeah, if you're planning on just doing something where you're farming corn, after the collapse, like that's a good place to do it. There's not very many trees though, and trees are, I think, going to become a lot more important. For one, it kind of can conceal, like your homestead or whatever, but also you can use it for building new structures, and you're going to need it for firewood and heating and that sort of thing. So yeah, in the Midwest, there's not a whole lot of trees for the most part. So that's a con, but you can always plant your own trees. And like I said, yeah, obviously the Midwest has really harsh winters, especially in the northern Midwest, which would be hard for survival. And I think that's going to be the main component for why you're going to see a lot of people leaving the northern Midwest, especially, and heading south, because winters are going to become a major survival factor. And then of course you have really harsh like tornadoes and thunderstorms and that sort of thing in the Midwest, which is an issue now for people living there. But I think especially if you're building new structures that aren't tornado proof, it could be an even bigger issue. It's just something to consider if nothing else. So next I'm going to talk about the eastern United States, and like I said, just kind of in general. I'm not talking about every single part of the East is like this, but you tend to have a really high population. You have all those big cities, Philadelphia, DC, New York, all those big cities on the East. And while it's a really high population, it tends to be unarmed, which they're still going to be dangerous, still going to be hungry people, doing what they can to survive. And once things go down, they're going to be coming out of the cities into the wilderness, which you should be doing too. So you probably will have a lot more people to deal with. Some of it's hills, some of it's flat. I prefer the hills for the reasons I said before. But yeah, you've got a little bit of both. Appalachians especially is really mountainous. And it'd probably be the best place in the East to be, I would say. But you've got some good planting in the East, some not. Virginia especially, it's always been a big place for growing cash crops and stuff since its inception. So obviously there's good growing there. But not everywhere. Appalachians, like West Virginia, kind of sucks for growing stuff, besides opium. So you have plenty of water sources, lots of rivers, creeks, that sort of thing. That's obviously going to be super important. Lots of small game, not a ton of big game, but there is white-tailed deer and that sort of thing. You got lots of forests, which are important. And you got pretty hard winters in the northern part, which I think you're going to see a lot of people coming down from there, probably into the more southern part. But those who can hack it up in Maine and stuff, you got a lot of survivalists up there. If they can hold on to it, I think they're going to have a lot more resources, just because the population's going to be leaving, and yeah, if you can make it up there, you should be all right. They have hurricanes too, which are obviously devastating, so that'd be a consideration, especially if you're right on the coast. I wouldn't want to be there because say it collapses, all the infrastructure is gone, then a hurricane comes in and there's no relief because infrastructure's gone, so you're really screwed in that case. But yeah, the oceans too, you can get a lot of resources from them, but I don't know if I'd want to risk the hurricanes. So then I'm going to talk about the Southwest. So you got a low population, and the population that is there is mostly in the cities and suburbs, and most of those people aren't going to be able to make it into the desert or probably even try. They're probably going to be heading out of there, I would say, because the desert is just really hard to survive in. And it tends to be pretty rugged terrain, pretty mountainous, or at least with hills and that sort of thing. Lots of places to hide in those hills. You've got a limited water supply. Obviously, it's a desert. Now, one thing, if you are in this kind of area, I would probably want to set up along a water supply, along a creek especially. Ponds are alright if they're stocked, but it's going to be hard not to eat all the fish in the pond. With a creek, you should have, more fish should keep coming through. But yeah, if you set up along a water supply, food is going to be coming to you because there's not a lot of it, so, all the animals are going to need to come get a drink. And you've got a really limited supply of wood. There's really not much good wood out there that you can build something with. You have kind of like scraggly little like shrub type trees that you could use for firewood, but not a whole lot else. Really hard to grow stuff, obviously. There's wild edibles like, prickly pear and that sort of thing, of course, but good luck growing, corn and like potatoes. Like that'd be rough out there. And obviously you have really harsh summers and cold nights on average. But yeah, harsh summers, that's a no-go for me. I fry easily. I'm really pale, obviously, so the summer in the Southwest is gonna, I wouldn't even consider it. So next, I've got the Rockies on here. So they have a pretty small population. I mean, there's Denver, but that's kind of right on the edge. And you don't really have a lot of big cities and stuff that are in the mountains themselves. And it's obviously really rugged terrain. Really hard to move around in the Rockies very quickly and get anywhere very fast, which I think is a good thing, because people can't get to you, like raiders, if they're going to be coming through, like, that area. They're probably not going to want to, like, spend all this time going up into the middle of the nowhere in the mountains where someone may or may not be for who knows what kind of reward. So they're probably going to be moving on to lowland areas where, you can see for miles and you can see where the little towns are and they're easy to access. So you're pretty safe from people there, I would say, for the most part. You have unpredictable weather in the mountains. So, it can just change super fast on you. Like some areas, it rains constantly in the mountains. Some areas, it's super dry, so it's kind of hard to know. And that's a negative, obviously. And it's hard to grow because it's rocky. But there's lots of wild food, lots of plants and animals, big game animals. So, yeah, if you are living out there, you're probably going to be doing more of like the hunter-gatherer thing than the farming thing, but you could do some limited farming even still. And one thing you have to consider in the Rockies that you don't have to consider most of the U.S. is dangerous wildlife. So, you have bears up there. There's black bears in lots of parts, but many places in the Rockies have grizzly bears, and then you've got moose that can kill you and stuff, and rattlesnakes too. You got rattlesnakes in the Southwest, but, venomous snakes. So, yeah, dangerous wildlife would be something that you want to consider for sure. But I'd be more worried about people than wildlife. So next I'm going to talk about the Ozarks, and that's where I'm at. I think the Ozarks is a really good spot. And human factors play in that too. Like, I've lived here most of my life, so I know it well. That's, I think, going to be a huge consideration for a lot of people, even if you're in a place that geographically maybe isn't super great, but you know how to make it there. Maybe that's the right place for you. But if you're not familiar, the Ozarks is like southwest Missouri, northern Arkansas, I think a little bit of Oklahoma. It's mid-sized population density, I'd say. You don't have a lot of huge cities, but kind of that northwest Arkansas area around Fayetteville has, I think, like 1 million people within those few cities, which is large. And then you've got Springfield, which is like a few 100,000 people in the surrounding area, which is, I'm not sure, less than 1 million, but there's still a lot of people out there. But outside of that, it tends to be smaller towns, like 10,000 people down to like 20 people, the farther away you get from those population centers. So it can definitely be super rural too. But that population, even in the cities, tends to be really armed. That's just kind of the culture here. So unlike, the East, where you might have huge groups of people coming in that are armed with like knives and clubs and stuff, you can have like 10 guys raiding in the Ozarks with, you know, ARs and stuff, which I would think would be more dangerous. You've got lots of forests. It's a really forested place. There's cleared fields and stuff too. So you kind of get a little bit of a little mix of both. You got lots of wild game, lots of white-tailed deer, lots of small game as well, squirrels, rabbits, raccoons, that sort of thing is everywhere, and pretty good fishing for the most part too. And that goes into, we got lots of water sources. It's hard to go very far without going into a creek or pond around here. There's just a lot. You got moderate temperatures, and when I say that, like, our winters aren't as harsh as the rest of the Midwest. It gets, I mean, I can think of times where it's got down to like -10, but on average it hangs around freezing during the winter time, which it really isn't so bad. Usually, you know, ponds and creeks aren't totally freezing over. You do get some snow though. And then in the summertime, summers aren't too bad, but it'll usually hang around 80, can get up to like 100 something, but really humid, so not awful. The main thing about the weather is it's kind of unpredictable here. The jet stream goes right over us, so if that jet stream kind of fluctuates, moves south, moves north, our weather can change really fast. So like 30 degrees, like a fluctuation a day is like super normal, happens all the time. I can think of times when it's been like 50 degrees of fluctuation, like it can be 80 and then the next day straight up be like 30 degrees, which is so weird. So it's kind of hard to prepare for that sort of thing. Yeah, and it's pretty rugged with hills and stuff. The population centers tend to be in the more flatter areas, so like Springfield is pretty flat in the surrounding area. But then if you go north, south, east, or west of Springfield, you've got hills that are pretty remote and with low population. And then Branson area, going down into Arkansas, like the Boston Mountains, that's like really rugged. It's nothing like the Appalachians or the Rocky Mountains, but it's still hills and rugged terrain, hard to access. And then going with that, kind of like the Rockies, you've got really rocky soil for the most part. So it can be hard to work and grow and like dig and that sort of thing. But most things will still grow here, like corn farming and soybeans, like all that is fine. Especially like lots of fields have already been cleared and stuff. So yeah, something kind of about the Ozarks that's nice is you just have like a little bit of everything. Like you got fields, hills, forest, lowlands, creeks. So it kind of gives you a little bit of everything, and that's why I think it's a really good place to be. But yeah, that's what I think about places to be and some considerations for when it goes down. So have a good day. Peace.